I stared at the arbitration agreement on the mahogany desk, my stepmother Victoria's perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently beside it. The late afternoon sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive office cast her shadow across the document like a threat. "Just sign it, Claire," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "It's standard procedure for all senior engineers. You want to be promoted, don't you?" My stepsister Madison smirked from her position by the door, arms crossed over her designer blazer. At 26, she was 2 years younger than me, but held the title of VP of Operations at Chen Technologies, our family's semiconductor company. I was just a senior engineer, despite having a PhD and doing the actual work that kept this company profitable. In my previous life, the one that ended 6 months ago when I was 28, I had refused to sign this agreement. I had stood my ground, thinking I was being smart, protecting my rights. That decision had been the beginning of the end. But I wasn't that naive Claire anymore. I picked up the Mont Blanc pen Victoria had deliberately placed within reach. The same pen my late father had used to sign his will. The will that left 60% of his company to his second wife and her daughter, and only 15% to me. The remaining 25% was divided among minority shareholders and employees. "You're right," I said calmly, watching Victoria's eyes widen slightly in surprise. "It is standard procedure." I signed my name with a flourish, Claire Chen, PhD. Madison's smirk widened. "Finally showing some sense, sis." I smiled back at her, a genuine smile that seemed to unsettle her. I'm full of surprises. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that 3 hours earlier, my union representative, Marcus Washington, had filed a comprehensive lawsuit in federal court. Not just for me, but as a class action on behalf of 47 engineers, technicians, and workers at Chen Technologies. The arbitration agreement they'd just had me sign? Worthless. You can't force someone into arbitration for claims already pending in federal court, and you certainly can't do it when the union is the one bringing the action. Marcus had taught me that in my previous life, right before they fired him and destroyed his career for trying to help me. This time, I'd gotten to him first. 6 months earlier, in this life, I woke up in my childhood bedroom, gasping for air, my hands clutching at my chest where the pain had been, where it should have been. But there was nothing, no crushing weight, no burning sensation, no sensation of drowning in my own blood. The floral wallpaper my mother had chosen before she died when I was 8 stared back at me. The walls were supposed to have been renovated when I was 23, but they were still there, faded and familiar. My phone buzzed. A flip phone. I hadn't owned a flip phone since. The date on the screen read, April 15th, 2019. I was 23 years old again. 5 years had been erased, given back to me like a cosmic gift I didn't understand and didn't question. I had died in that hospital bed at 28, my body ravaged by poisoning. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies. No, this had been slow and insidious. Heavy metal poisoning, specifically thallium, introduced into my food over months by Madison, who had access to the chemistry lab at Chen Technologies. She'd been so careful, so patient. The doctors had figured it out too late. My organs were failing. Victoria had stood by my hospital bed with crocodile tears, telling me how sorry she was, how much my father would have grieved to see me like this. Madison hadn't even bothered to visit. I'd died alone, powerless, destroyed piece by piece over 5 years. It had started with small things, projects stolen and presented as Madison's work, credit denied. Then bigger, being passed over for promotions despite my credentials, being excluded from meetings, finding out that the patents I'd developed were registered under Madison's name. When I'd threatened to whistleblow about the company's violation of labor laws and patent theft, they'd moved to fire me. I'd fought back, reached out to Marcus Washington, the head of the engineering union. Together, we'd started building a case. Then Marcus had been terminated on fabricated charges of harassment. The woman who accused him? A plant. Someone Victoria had hired and placed in the company specifically for that purpose. Marcus lost his job, his reputation, his savings defending himself. And I'd been isolated, weakened, and then slowly poisoned. I'd spent my last conscious days in that hospital bed piecing it together, helpless and betrayed, watching Victoria and Madison inherit everything when I died. the company I'd helped build with my innovations, the patents worth hundreds of millions, even my mother's jewelry, which should have been mine by right. But now I was back, 23, healthy, and I remembered everything. I remembered which projects would succeed and which would fail. I remembered which clients would become major accounts and which would default. I remembered every dirty trick Victoria and Madison would pull. And I remembered Marcus Washington, the only person who had tried to help me, who had sacrificed his career trying to save mine. I picked up my phone and started making a list the first week. My father had died 3 months ago in this timeline. The funeral was behind us, the will had been read, and Victoria had consolidated her power. At 23, I was fresh out of my PhD program at Stanford, armed with a degree in semiconductor engineering and 3 patents I'd developed during my research. In my previous life, I'd signed those patents over to the company immediately, trusting that I'd be rewarded for my contributions. This time, I kept them in my name. "Claire, darling," Victoria had said during our first family dinner after my return from Stanford. "We should discuss your patents. For liability purposes, it would be better if they were held by Chen Technologies. You understand, don't you? You'll still receive credit." Madison had nodded enthusiastically. "It's really for your protection, sis. You don't want to be personally liable if anything goes wrong." I'd smiled and said I'd think about it. Then I'd gone home and immediately filed for additional protections on those patents, expanded their scope, and documented everything in a secure location far from their reach. The first real sign of trouble came 2 weeks later when I was called into Victoria's office. She'd smiled that predatory smile and slid a contract across her desk. "We're restructuring the engineering department," she'd said. "Everyone needs to sign a new employment agreement. Just a formality." The contract was a nightmare of clauses that would sign away my rights. Non-compete agreements that would prevent me from working anywhere in the industry for 5 years, intellectual property clauses that would give the company ownership of anything I invented, even in my spare time, and mandatory arbitration for all disputes. In my previous life, I'd consulted a lawyer who'd advised me to negotiate. I'd tried. Victoria had withdrawn the promotion she'd dangled and made my life hell instead. This time, I took the contract to someone else first. Marcus Washington. The union office was in a strip mall in Fremont, sandwiched between a faux restaurant and a phone repair shop. The Semiconductor and Technical Workers Union, Local 412, had been fighting for workers' rights in Silicon Valley for 30 years, but they were always outgunned by the massive companies with their armies of corporate lawyers. Marcus Washington was 53 years old, with gray threading through his close-cropped hair and deep lines around his eyes from decades of fighting losing battles. But there was steel in his gaze and integrity in every word he spoke. In my previous life, he'd risked everything to help me. He'd lost. This time, he wouldn't. "Ms. Chen," he said, gesturing to a worn chair across from his cluttered desk. "What can I do for you?" I slid the employment contract across to him. "They're trying to get me to sign this, but I think there might be problems with it." He picked it up, his eyes scanning the pages. His jaw tightened as he read. "This is unconscionable," he said finally. "These non-compete clauses would be unenforceable in California, but the arbitration clause is the real problem. They're trying to prevent you from ever taking them to court." "That's what I thought," I said. "But here's the thing, Mr. Washington. I don't think I'm the only one they're doing this to." I pulled out a USB drive and slid it across the desk. "I've been talking to other engineers in the company, quietly. 23 of them have been presented with similar contracts in the last 6 months. 8 have already signed. The others are afraid to refuse because they think they'll be fired." His eyebrows rose. "How did you gather this information?" "I'm good at my job," I said simply. "And I pay attention. But I need help, real help, the kind that comes with legal power." Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me. "You're James Chen's daughter. Your family owns the company." "My stepmother and stepsister own the company," I corrected. "I own 15%. I have no voting rights until I'm 25. And even then, they can outvote me. My father's will saw to that." "And you're willing to go against your family?" I met his eyes. "They're not my family. My family was my father and my mother. Victoria married my father for his money, and Madison has never seen me as anything but competition. If I don't stop them now, they'll destroy everything my father built, exploit every worker in that company, and get rich doing it." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll need to verify everything on this drive. If it's what you say it is, we might have grounds for a class action. But Ms. Chen, you need to understand, if we do this, there's no going back. Your stepmother will come after you with everything she has." I smiled, and I knew it didn't reach my eyes. I'm counting on it. The next 3 months, I became a model employee. I arrived early, stayed late, smiled at Madison's barbs, and deferred to Victoria's decisions. I signed up for every project, volunteered for every committee, and made myself indispensable. I also documented everything. Every time Madison took credit for my work, I had the original files with timestamps. Every time Victoria denied me a meeting or excluded me from decisions, I noted it. Every safety violation, every corner cut, every labor law broken, I recorded it all, and I fed it to Marcus. He'd been right to be cautious. The information I'd given him had checked out, and more engineers had come forward once word spread quietly that someone was building a case. The union's lawyers started compiling evidence of systematic labor violations at Chen Technologies. But Marcus and I both knew we needed something bigger, something that would make it impossible for Victoria to sweep under the rug or settle quietly. That's when I told him about the patents. The patent theft. In my previous life, this had happened slowly. Madison would ask to collaborate on projects, then present them as her own. Victoria would reassign my work to other teams, then patent the results under the company's name with Madison listed as the inventor. By the time I'd realized what was happening, it was too late. The patents were filed, my name was nowhere on them, and I had no proof that I'd been the one to develop the technology. This time, I let them think they were succeeding while I built my case. I worked on 3 major projects simultaneously, each one a significant advancement in semiconductor design. Project Helix was a new chip architecture that would improve processing speed by 40%. Project Cascade was a heat management system that would solve one of the industry's biggest problems. Project Artemis was a breakthrough in quantum computing integration. For each project, I kept meticulous records. Every design iteration, every calculation, every breakthrough, all documented with timestamps, backed up to multiple secure locations, and shared with Marcus and the union's lawyers. I also did something I hadn't done in my previous life. I filed provisional patent applications for all 3 projects in my own name before I ever showed them to anyone at the company. Then I walked into Madison's office and offered to collaborate. She jumped at the chance, of course. In her mind, I was still the naive little stepsister who wanted approval, who wanted to be part of the family. She didn't see the trap. Over the next 6 weeks, I worked with Madison on all 3 projects. In reality, I gave her just enough information to make her think she understood the technology while keeping the crucial innovations to myself. I let her present early versions to Victoria. I watched as they got excited about the potential. Then I watched as Madison filed patent applications for all 3 projects, listing herself as the sole inventor. That's when Marcus and I sprang the trap. The union's lawyers filed a complaint with the United States Patent and Trademark Office, providing evidence that I was the true inventor. My provisional patents, filed months earlier, predated Madison's applications. My documentation proved that every innovation in the projects had come from me, but we didn't stop there. We also filed a lawsuit in federal court, not just for patent theft, but for a pattern of systematic abuse of engineers at Chen Technologies. Wage theft, unsafe working conditions, violation of overtime laws, retaliation against workers who complained, and systematic theft of intellectual property from employees. 47 engineers signed on as plaintiffs. Marcus Washington was our representative, and I was the lead plaintiff, the one whose case would prove the pattern. The lawsuit was filed on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, every major tech publication in Silicon Valley had the story. By Wednesday, Victoria was calling me into her office, the arbitration agreement. "This is outrageous," Victoria hissed, her composure finally cracking. "After everything we've done for you, after we brought you into this company, gave you opportunities." "You gave me opportunities?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "I earned my position here with my PhD and my work. You've done nothing but steal from me since the day I arrived." Madison stood by the window, her face pale. She'd been served with papers that morning alleging patent fraud. If convicted, she could face criminal charges and would certainly lose her engineering license. "We can make this all go away," Victoria said, switching tactics. Her voice became pleading. "Claire, sweetheart, there's been a misunderstanding. We can fix this. Just drop the lawsuit and we'll make sure you get proper credit going forward. We'll even give you that promotion you've been wanting." "And the other 47 engineers?" I asked. "What about them?" She waved a hand dismissively. "They can be compensated. We'll settle. But, Claire, you have to understand, a public lawsuit will destroy this company. Destroy your father's legacy. Is that what you want?" "My father's legacy is already destroyed," I said coldly. "You destroyed it when you married him for his money. Madison destroyed it when she cheated her way through every promotion. And between the two of you, you've turned this company into a sweatshop that exploits the people who actually do the work." Victoria's eyes hardened. "You ungrateful little bitch. After everything?" "After everything what?" I interrupted. "After you poisoned me?" The room went silent. Madison's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide. Victoria's face went blank. "Oh, you haven't done it yet," I said softly. "But you will, or you would have in another timeline. Thallium poisoning slowly introduced into my food over the course of months. You'd wait until after you'd destroyed my career, isolated me, and made sure I had no allies left. Then you'd kill me and inherit my shares." I was taking a calculated risk. Revealing this, they'd think I was crazy or bluffing. But the look of guilt that flashed across Madison's face just for a second told me I was right. They'd already discussed it. Victoria recovered quickly. "You're delusional. This lawsuit has clearly put you under too much stress. Perhaps you should take some time off, get some rest." "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "And I'm not dropping the lawsuit." That's when she pulled out the arbitration agreement. "Then you leave me no choice," she said, her voice cold. "Every engineer at this company has to sign one of these. If you want to continue working here, you'll sign it too." I looked at the document. The same one from my previous life, the one I'd refused to sign, the one that had started my downfall. "And if I don't sign, then you're terminated for insubordination, effective immediately." In my previous life, I'd seen this as the principled choice. I'd refused, I'd been fired, and I'd thought I could fight them in court. But Victoria had buried me under motions and delays, bled me dry with legal fees, and by the time the case might have gone to trial, I was too poisoned to care anymore. This time, I knew better. "I'll sign it," I said. Victoria blinked, clearly surprised. "You will?" "It's standard procedure, isn't it?" I said, reaching for the pen. "And I want to be a team player." I signed my name, dated it, and slid it back across the desk. Madison looked suspicious. "Just like that? You're giving up?" I smiled. "I'm being practical. The lawsuit isn't my decision to make. It's the union's. I'm just one of 47 plaintiffs. Whether I sign this or not doesn't change anything." Which was absolutely true. The arbitration agreement couldn't force me out of a lawsuit I hadn't personally filed. The union had filed it as a collective action on behalf of all affected workers. My individual arbitration agreement had no power over that. But Victoria didn't understand labor law well enough to know that. Neither did Madison. They'd paid corporate lawyers who specialized in protecting companies from individual lawsuits, not from organized labor actions. I stood up. "Is there anything else?" Victoria looked like she wanted to say something, but she just shook her head, still processing her apparent victory. "Then I'll get back to work," I said. "We have that presentation for the Nakamura account tomorrow, and I know Madison will want my input on the chip specifications." Madison flinched at the mention of Nakamura. It was one of the projects where she'd stolen my work, and the specifications she'd presented had significant flaws that I'd deliberately left in. The presentation was going to be a disaster, and she knew it. I left the office and walked calmly to the elevator. Once inside and alone, I pulled out my phone and sent Marcus a text. Signed it. They took the bait. His response came immediately. "Good. Judge granted our motion for expedited discovery this morning. We'll have access to their files within 2 weeks." I smiled. In my previous life, I'd fought them alone and I'd lost. This time, I had an army behind me and I knew every move they'd make before they made it. The war wasn't over, but I'd just won the first major battle. Discovery. The thing about corporations is that they document everything. Every email, every memo, every meeting note, it all goes into servers and filing cabinets where it sits, just waiting for a lawyer with a subpoena. The union's legal team had filed for expedited discovery, arguing that there was evidence of ongoing harm to workers and that Chen Technologies might destroy evidence if given time. The judge agreed. Within 2 weeks, we had access to everything. And Victoria had been sloppy. There were emails discussing problem employees who needed to be managed out. There were budget documents showing systematic underpayment of overtime. There were safety inspection reports that had been falsified. And most damning of all, there were communications between Victoria and Madison explicitly discussing how to take credit for my work. One email, dated 3 months after my father's death, made it crystal clear. From Victoria Chen to Madison Chen. Subject, Claire's projects. We need to be systematic about this. Claire is too smart and too educated. She could be a real threat if we're not careful, but she's also naive and desperate for family approval. Use that. Let her do the work, then present it yourself. As long as we control the patent filings and the credit, she can't prove anything. Once she's served her purpose, we'll find a way to ease her out. The company doesn't need 2 engineers in the family, and you're far more manageable. I read that email sitting in Marcus's office with the union's 3 lawyers standing around us. The lead attorney, a fierce woman named Sarah Nkomo, actually smiled when she saw it. "This is smoking gun material," she said. "They admitted to a conspiracy to steal intellectual property and defraud an employee. Combined with the patent evidence and the testimonies from other engineers, we have them." "They'll try to settle," Marcus warned. "They'll offer money to make this go away quietly." "No settlement," I said firmly. "I want this to go to trial. I want it on the public record." Sarah looked at me carefully. "That's going to be brutal, Claire. They'll attack your character. They'll drag your father's memory through the mud. They'll make your life hell." "They already did that once," I said. "I died because of them. This time, I'm ready." The Nakamura disaster. While the lawsuit ground forward through the courts, life at Chen Technologies continued, and I made sure to be present for every moment of Madison's impending humiliation. The Nakamura Corporation was one of the biggest electronics manufacturers in Japan, and they were looking to partner with an American semiconductor company for their next generation of smartphones. Chen Technologies was one of 3 companies in the running for a contract worth $800 million. Madison had been put in charge of the presentation using her chip design, the one I'd deliberately sabotaged. The day of the presentation, I sat in the conference room wearing a smile. Victoria had insisted I be there as technical support, which meant Madison could pawn off any difficult questions to me. She thought she was being clever, using me as a backup while taking all the credit. The Nakamura executives arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, 3 men in immaculate suits, and 1 woman who I recognized from my previous life as Dr. Keiko Yamamoto, their chief technical officer. Dr. Yamamoto had a PhD from MIT and had published more papers on semiconductor design than anyone else in the industry. She was also going to eviscerate Madison's presentation. Madison started confidently, walking through the slides that showcased her revolutionary chip design. She talked about the improved processing speeds, the enhanced efficiency, and the innovative architecture. Then Dr. Yamamoto raised her hand. "Excuse me," she said in perfect English. "Can you explain the thermal management approach in your design? I'm seeing potential heat concentration in the northeast quadrant that could lead to system failure under load." Madison blinked. "The thermal management is state-of-the-art. Our testing shows—" "What testing?" Dr. Yamamoto asked. "Your presentation doesn't include any thermal analysis data. Given the power, density you're claiming, I'd expect to see comprehensive cooling simulations." I watched Madison's face go pale. She glanced at me, a silent plea for help. I smiled and said nothing. We have that data," Madison stammered. "It's in our technical documentation." "Which you haven't provided," Dr. Yamamoto said. She turned to her colleagues and said something in rapid Japanese. One of them pulled out a tablet and started typing. Ms. Chen, Dr. Yamamoto said, turning back to Madison. I'm looking at the patent application for this design. Patent number US 2099234567. It lists you as the sole inventor. That's correct, Madison said, trying to regain her composure. Then perhaps you can explain this calculation here, Dr. Yamamoto said, projecting an image from her tablet onto the screen. It showed one of the core equations from the chip design. Your power efficiency claim requires this equation to balance, but the variables on the right side don't match the constraints on the left. This design would fail within hours of operation. The room went silent. There must be a mistake in the patent filing, Madison said weakly. I'll have to check my original notes. Please do, Dr. Yamamoto said coldly. Because right now this looks like either incompetent engineering or fraud, neither of which Nakamura Corporation is interested in partnering with. Victoria jumped in, trying to salvage the situation. Dr. Yamamoto, I assure you this is just a misunderstanding. Claire, perhaps you can clarify the technical specifications? All eyes turned to me. I could have helped. I could have explained the correct calculations and saved the presentation. In my previous life, I would have. I would have bailed Madison out because I still believed in family loyalty, still hoped that if I proved my value, they'd finally respect me. This time, I knew better. I'm afraid I can't, I said pleasantly. I wasn't involved in the development of this design. This is entirely Madison's work. She should be able to explain it. Madison's eyes widened in panic. But we worked on this together, did we? I asked, my voice sweet. Because the patent lists you as the sole inventor. I'd hate to contradict legal documents. Dr. Yamamoto stood up. We've seen enough. Gentlemen, we're done here. The Nakamura executives filed out. The $800 million contract walked out the door with them. Victoria turned to me, fury in her eyes. You sabotaged this. How could I sabotage something I didn't work on? I asked innocently. Madison made it very clear this was her project. I was just here for technical support, but apparently my support wasn't needed. I gathered my things and left the conference room, leaving Madison in tears and Victoria shaking with rage. The whispers started immediately. By lunch, everyone in the company knew that Madison had crashed and burned in front of Nakamura. By the end of the day, 3 other potential clients had called to cancel their meetings, spooked by the rumors of technical incompetence. Chen Technologies' stock price dropped 6% in a single day. And I'd been in the room for all of it, an innocent bystander to Madison's self-destruction. The federal court filing 3 days after the Nakamura disaster, the bomb dropped. I was in my cubicle, working on a legitimate project, one that would actually benefit the company because unlike Victoria and Madison, I actually cared about the workers whose livelihoods depended on Chen Technologies staying afloat. When my phone buzzed with a news alert, Chen Technologies faces major labor lawsuit, federal court to hear class action claims of systematic abuse. The article included details from our filing: the patent theft, the wage violations, the safety issues, the systematic retaliation against workers who complained, and it included quotes from engineers describing how they'd been exploited and abused. My phone started ringing immediately. Other engineers calling to thank me, press outlets wanting interviews, investors panicking about the legal exposure. I ignored them all except for one call from Marcus. It's officially filed, he said, and the court accepted our motion to consolidate all claims. This is going to be big, Claire. How big? If we win, we're looking at potentially hundreds of millions in damages, back pay, punitive damages, patent restitution, legal fees, and that's before we get to the SEC investigation. SEC investigation? Your patent evidence triggered some flags. If Victoria and Madison fraudulently filed patents and used those patents to inflate the company's value to investors, that's securities fraud. The feds are interested. I felt a dark satisfaction settle in my chest. In my previous life, they'd destroyed me quietly, privately, with no one watching. This time, their downfall would be public and complete. What happens now? I asked. Now they try to fight back. They'll attack your credibility. They'll claim the union is overreaching. They'll try to get the case dismissed. But Claire, we have them. The evidence is overwhelming. Good, I said. Let them fight. I want them to see it coming this time. The counterattack. Victoria didn't disappoint. Within 48 hours of the federal filing, Chen Technologies filed motions to dismiss the case, arguing that all the plaintiffs had signed arbitration agreements and couldn't sue in federal court. That's where my signed agreement came in. I'd been the last engineer to sign, and Chen Technologies' lawyers thought that gave them leverage. They filed an emergency motion, arguing that since even the lead plaintiff had agreed to arbitration, the entire case should be dismissed. Sarah and Como responded with a brief that I kept a framed copy of in my office later. The argument was simple. The union had filed the lawsuit, not me personally. The arbitration agreement I'd signed covered disputes between me as an individual and Chen Technologies as an employer. But it didn't, and legally couldn't, prevent the union from bringing a collective action on behalf of all its members. Moreover, the lawsuit had been filed before I signed the arbitration agreement. You can't retroactively force someone into arbitration for claims already pending in court. And finally, even if the arbitration agreement were valid and applicable, arbitration clauses are often unenforceable when they're used to prevent employees from joining class actions, especially in cases involving systematic civil rights violations and labor law abuses. The judge's ruling was scathing. She denied Chen Technologies' motion to dismiss and specifically called out their attempt to use arbitration clauses as a bad faith effort to insulate the company from accountability for systematic and egregious violations of federal labor law. Victoria had thought she was so clever, forcing me to sign that agreement. Instead, she'd created a paper trail showing that she'd tried to coerce employees into giving up their legal rights after learning about the federal investigation. It made our case stronger, not weaker. The day the ruling came down, I was called into Victoria's office again. This time, security was present. "You're fired," Victoria said without preamble. "Effective immediately. For insubordination, for violating your non-disclosure agreement, and for sabotaging the Nakamura deal." I looked at the security guards, two large men I didn't recognize, and then back at Victoria. "You can't fire me," I said calmly. "I'm the CEO. I can fire whoever I want." "You can't fire me for participating in a federal lawsuit," I clarified. "That's retaliation, and it's illegal. Every employment lawyer in the country will tell you that." "You sabotaged a major deal?" "I answered questions honestly during a presentation," I interrupted. "If Madison's work couldn't withstand basic technical scrutiny, that's not my fault." Victoria's face went red. "You think you're so smart. You think you've won. But you're destroying your own family, Claire. Your father would be ashamed of you." That hit harder than I expected, but I'd had 5 years in another life to process my father's death and his choices. "My father would be ashamed of what you've done to his company," I said quietly. "He built this place to innovate and create. You've turned it into a sweatshop. You've stolen from your employees. You've committed fraud, and you've done it all while hiding behind his name and his legacy." "Get out," Victoria hissed. "I'm already leaving," I said. "But I'll be back. When the federal marshals come with warrants, when the SEC starts their investigation, when every one of your crimes is exposed in open court, I'll be there for all of it." I walked out of Chen Technologies that day, with my head high. I'd been fired, yes. But I'd also just given Victoria enough rope to hang herself with, and the wrongful termination lawsuit was filed before the end of the business day. The discovery process continues. Being fired was actually the best thing that could have happened for our case. It proved retaliation, which meant we could add civil rights violations to our claims. And it freed me up to work full-time on the lawsuit. I moved into a small apartment near Marcus's office and spent my days working with Sarah and the legal team, going through the mountains of evidence we'd obtained through discovery. What we found was worse than I'd imagined. Chen Technologies had been systematically underpaying overtime for 5 years. They'd misclassified engineers as exempt employees to avoid paying time and a half, even though the engineers didn't meet the legal requirements for exemption. Total estimated wage theft, $12 million. They'd violated safety regulations at their fabrication facility, exposing workers to toxic chemicals without proper equipment. 3 engineers had developed respiratory problems. 2 had cancer. The company had known about the risks and had chosen to save money rather than fix the problems. They'd retaliated against 17 workers who'd complained about various issues, using tactics ranging from reassignment to hostile work environments to outright termination on manufactured grounds. And they'd stolen intellectual property from at least a dozen engineers besides me, filing patents under company names without proper attribution or compensation. But the worst discovery, the one that made even our hardened lawyers go pale, was the email chain about me. It started 6 months after my father's death and continued for 3 years in my previous life. Victoria and Madison discussing how to neutralize me. The thallium was mentioned explicitly in emails from Madison to Victoria's personal account. Found a substance that's hard to detect and accumulates slowly, Madison had written. Used in rat poison. Could introduce it via the coffee machine in the break room she uses. Would take months but look natural. Victoria's response. Too risky if anyone else uses that machine. Her apartment would be safer. You have her spare key. They'd planned my murder in writing. Sarah immediately contacted the FBI. Conspiracy to commit murder was a federal crime, and with written evidence, it was an easy case. That night, I sat in my apartment and cried for the first time since I'd been reborn. Not from fear, I knew how to stop them now, but from the pure horror of realizing how much they'd hated me, how little my life had meant to them. Marcus came over when I called him. He didn't say anything, just sat with me while I processed it all. They're going to prison, he said finally. I'll make sure of it. I know, I said. But Marcus, thank you. In another life, you tried to help me and they destroyed you for it. I couldn't let that happen again. He gave me a strange look. Another life? I smiled through my tears, just a figure of speech. The criminal charges. The FBI moved fast. With the email evidence and testimony from me about the timeline, they had enough for arrest warrants. Victoria and Madison were arrested on a Tuesday morning. The charges, conspiracy to commit murder, securities fraud, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice. The perp walk was captured by every news outlet in Silicon Valley. Victoria in handcuffs, her perfect composure, finally shattered. Madison crying and claiming she was innocent. The criminal trial wouldn't happen for months. The federal system moved slowly, but the arrests changed everything about our civil case. Suddenly, Chen Technologies' board of directors was interested in settling. The company's reputation was in free fall. Major clients were canceling contracts. The stock price had dropped 40%, and with Victoria and Madison in jail, bail denied due to flight risk, there was no one to run the day-to-day operations. The board reached out to Marcus with a settlement offer, $200 million. Split among all plaintiffs and the union's legal fund. We said no. We want accountability, Sarah told them in the mediation session I attended via video call. You can't buy your way out of years of systematic abuse. Then what do you want? The board's lawyer asked. Admission of wrongdoing, public apology, structural reforms to ensure this never happens again, restoration of all stolen intellectual property to its rightful inventors, and fair compensation for every single worker who was harmed. That's not realistic. Then we'll see you in court, Sarah said. And when we win, you'll pay triple damages plus punitive penalties. Your choice. They went back to their clients. 3 days later, they accepted our terms. The settlement and beyond, the final settlement agreement ran to hundreds of pages, but the key points were simple. Chen Technologies admitted to systematic labor violations, wage theft, intellectual property theft, and retaliation against workers. The company would pay $350 million in total, $250 million in compensation and back pay to workers, $50 million to the union's legal fund, and $50 million in punitive damages to be distributed among the workers who'd suffered the most. All patents stolen from employees would be returned to their rightful inventors, with appropriate licensing agreements if the company wanted to continue using them. The company would implement independent oversight of all HR and engineering functions for 5 years. Any worker who'd been fired or forced out would be offered their position back with full back pay and seniority. Chen Technologies would issue a public apology and acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The press conference announcing the settlement was carried live on CNBC. Marcus stood at the podium with me and 46 other engineers behind him. This is what accountability looks like, he said. For too long, workers in this industry have been exploited by companies that prioritize profit over people. Today that changes. Today, workers at Chen Technologies won their dignity back. I didn't speak at the press conference. I didn't need to. My victory spoke for itself. My share of the $250 million in worker compensation, I received $47 million. It was based on a formula that accounted for stolen patents, unpaid wages, and damages for the attempted murder conspiracy. $47 million. More money than I could spend in a lifetime. But the money wasn't the point. The point was that Victoria and Madison's plans had been completely destroyed. The criminal trial happened 6 months later. Both were convicted on all counts. Victoria got 22 years in federal prison. Madison got 18. Chen Technologies survived, barely. The board brought in new management, implemented the reforms, and slowly started rebuilding the company's reputation. Many of the engineers who'd left came back, including me, though this time as a consultant with my own firm, licensing my patents to them for fair rates. The company I'd helped build would continue, but it would be better now, fairer, cleaner. 5 years later, I stood in my father's grave, placing flowers on the headstone. It was the anniversary of his death, and I'd made it a tradition to visit. "I saved your company, Dad," I said quietly. It took burning some bridges, but I saved it, and I'm using my share of the money to fund scholarships for engineering students, the James Chen Memorial Fellowship. I think you'd like that." The sun was warm on my back. My life was good. I'd published papers, filed new patents, built a consulting firm that worked with ethical companies. I'd donated millions to labor rights organizations and the union that had saved me. Marcus had retired from the union and now worked with me, helping other workers facing exploitation. We'd become close friends, and he'd told me once that our case had restored his faith in justice. "You gave me a second chance," I'd told him. "You gave yourself a second chance," he'd corrected. "You had the courage to fight back." But I knew the truth. I'd had the gift of foreknowledge, the ability to see my enemies' moves before they made them. I'd used that gift to dismantle them piece by piece, and I'd done it all legally, methodically, and completely. Victoria was in federal prison, her wealth seized, her reputation destroyed. She'd be 75 when she was released, and she'd have nothing to return to. Madison was in a minimum security facility, having cooperated with investigators to reduce her sentence. She'd testified against Victoria, provided evidence of other crimes, and thrown her mother under the bus to save herself. She'd be out in 12 years, but she'd never work in engineering again. Her license was permanently revoked. As for me, I was 28 years old in this timeline now, the same age I'd been when I died. But this time, I was alive, healthy, wealthy, and free. I'd won. Not just against Victoria and Madison, but against the system that had enabled them. The settlement had changed labor law precedent in California. Other workers were using our case as a template to fight their own battles against exploitative employers. My death in my previous life hadn't been meaningless. It had given me the knowledge to change everything. I left the graveyard and drove to my office, a small building in Palo Alto that housed Chen Innovation Labs, my consulting firm. 20 engineers worked for me now, all of them formerly from Chen Technologies. All of them people who'd been exploited and who now had the chance to do meaningful work in a fair environment. Marcus was waiting in my office with coffee and a smile. "Nakamura called," he said. "They want to discuss licensing Project Cascade." Project Cascade, my heat management system, the one Madison had tried to steal. I'd perfected it after leaving Chen Technologies, and it was now the industry standard. "Tell them I'm interested," I said, "but only if they meet our labor standards for any manufacturing contracts." Marcus grinned. "You know they will. Everyone knows that if you're willing to work with a company, it means they're treating their workers right. Your endorsement is worth millions in market credibility." I'd accidentally become an icon in the labor rights movement. Engineers called me for advice. Union organizers asked me to speak at conferences. I'd even been invited to testify before Congress about labor protections in the tech industry. It was strange being famous, but it was also good. I was using my platform to make change. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. From prison. "I know what you did. I know you knew. I don't know how, but I know. You'll pay for this. Victoria." She'd somehow gotten access to a contraband phone. I smiled and deleted the text. Let her rage in her cell. She had 18 more years to figure out how I'd beaten her, and she'd never find the answer. Because the answer was impossible. I'd lived it all before. I'd died, and I'd been given a second chance. And I'd used that chance to dismantle every trap they'd laid for me, to turn their weapons against them, to ensure that justice was served. In my previous life, I'd died alone, poisoned, broken, and defeated. In this life, I'd won. And I'd made sure that no other worker would have to suffer what I'd suffered. That was worth more than money, more than revenge, more than anything. I'd signed that arbitration agreement immediately, knowing it was meaningless. And when Victoria had tried to use it against me, she'd found out that my union rep had already filed in federal court. It was the perfect trap, executed perfectly. And it was just the beginning of my new life, a life where I had power, purpose, and peace.